Hey everyone, welcome back to our second study for our Disciplines of a Godly Man study for Hope Chapel. This is our fall 2024 study, and if you would like to follow along, if you're watching this on YouTube, I want to encourage you guys to get the Disciplines of a Godly Man book, and you can follow along. Maybe you want to use it for your small group or whatever, but for our guys tonight, we're going to be talking about the discipline of purity. The discipline of purity. And Dr. Hughes, who wrote this book, in this chapter, he describes the American culture as Corinthian to the core. That takes a little bit of explanation because the Corinthian culture in the town of Corinth, which is south of Athens in Greece, was a very prosperous city. It had a massive, massive Greek temple that had thousands of temple prostitutes. They were these beautiful singers who would sing at night, right when the sun was getting ready to go down, and as the ship, the sailors were coming back into port, and they would sing. It was this beautiful song. That's where we get our phrase "the siren call" from, because they were sirens singing, and it led men up there to conduct their temple worship, which was often including acts of sleeping with the prostitutes there. And so it was a very debased culture, and it was known throughout the whole region. If you describe something called Corinthian, or you were called a Corinthian, it was basically mean that you were a man of loose values, and pretty much anything went. And which is sad because it's this beautiful place. It's right on the Aegean Sea, and it's just absolutely. It was a prosperous place. They were known for their Corinthian leather, if you've ever heard that before. And so there was a lot of stuff going for it, but it's just the fact is that it was so successful that people gave in to their lustful indulgences. And so there was not very much purity that was going on. And even within the Corinthian church, Paul had to write two very lengthy letters because he was often at odds and battling with them. And so he had to write letters because of just, if there was something that could be done wrong, they did it wrong. And, and so he was constantly on their case. They were challenging his leadership. They were calling him a fake apostle. They were preferring Apollo or other people over him. There was a four-way split going on in the church. I mean, it was literally like everything not to do was in the Corinthian church. And so especially within the church, the sad thing is this Paul's writing is that they had lost their grip on purity. And if that's not true of today, I don't know what is. I mean, I see everything going on, and I'm just absolutely blown away. I ran across a statistic just this last weekend, and I think I posted it on social media. But you know that out of a million people, on average, 400 men will commit sexual assault, and that's a lot. I mean, 400 men out of a million people will commit sexual assault. But did you know that for within the trans community, so transsexual men, that actually increases by 5 times to over 1,900 times. So out of a million people, 1,900 trans men will commit sexual assault. Now, those are crimes. Those are literally, committing things like rape and stuff on people that unsuspecting people. And it just shows you our culture today. And there really is a loss of purity, a lost grip on holiness. And Dr. Hughes says that sensuality is our biggest obstacle to godliness. And I think every man that's sitting in this audience this evening would probably agree with that sensuality, because the fact is it's everywhere. It's on TV, it's on our phones, it's on the streets. I mean, it's just always out there trying to trip us up. And so Dr. Hughes shares the story of King David. And, he takes a really interesting thing, because oftentimes when we think of King David and we think of impurity, we think of his relationship with Bathsheba. But here's the interesting thing. He actually takes it back there. If you have your Bibles, I want you guys to go to 2 Samuel chapter 5, verse 13, because this is the verse that he shares. He says this, and David took more concubines and wives from Jerusalem after he came from Hebron, and more sons and daughters were born to David. Now, it kind of goes on from there. But he says, and I've agreed with this, and I've said this from the very beginning, that that the real thing that tripped up David was the fact is that he had multiple wives. Do you know that in Scripture, in Deuteronomy chapter 17, verses 14 through 17, it says that kings are only to have one wives? And that's the way God designed it. He designed man and woman to be with one another. They become one. If you have multiple wives, then you cannot become one with all of those people. And there's a emotional bond and there's a spiritual bond as well with the physical bond when a man and a woman come together and become one. And so here's David. He's taking more wives and more concubines, and concubines were just basically women that he would sleep with that he's not married to. And it's a wretched state. But yet people accepted it because that's what kings did back then. But that was really David's downfalling. And that's where David failed. He went into this progressive desensitization of to sin, and we kind of see that happen, and that's what happens to a lot of men as well. Dr. Hughes says in this chapter, he says it's the legal sensualities that take men down. And so it's oftentimes it's not the illegal stuff. It's the legal stuff. It's stuff like alcohol. It's stuff like pornography. It's adulteries. It's fornication, all that kind of stuff. And more men have been tripped up by legal sensualities than they ever have been with illegal ones. And even though illegal stuff is growing, as I told you about the transgender community, but also too like sexual trafficking amongst kids and girls is just absolutely exploding, and men all over the world are going online and purchasing these people, and it just like slaves, and it's absolutely sad. And I'm not sure if you know this, but outside the two big cities of California, San Francisco and Los Angeles, Santa Barbara counties is one of the largest sexual trafficking areas in the whole state. That just blows me away. And so, but it's the legal one, and it's the acceptable sensualities that have softened men. And I, you guys can think of 100 men, and I can think of 100 men who have been tripped up by those things. And it's just so dangerous. And so, how does this happen? Well, because we've relaxed from our rigors. We've relaxed from our rigors. And what that simply means is that rigor is a disciplined structure. It's a schedule. It's a routine. It's certain things that we do. And when we get tired, when we get burnt out, we back off of those things and we become relaxed. And that's when the devil has a chance to get a foothold in our lives. And when we relax from those rigors that help us become successful, we often relax in our areas of our moral life as well. And it's hard to maintain discipline when we're relaxing. And that's so true, we make so many excuses and so many justifications for it, but it's so true. And so we have to make sure that we don't relax. There's times to rest. Rest is a different thing. But we can't just take a break from all of the rigors. We have to keep that routine. We have to keep those disciplines. It helps prevent us. It creates boundaries and guardrails from tripping up by those things. The second area that he talks about that causes this fallenness in us in this pure impurity area is the fact is that we have a fixation, and Dr. Hughes describes it perfectly. A look becomes a stare. A look becomes a stare. And you guys know what that means. We see something, but instead of looking away like we would normally do, we linger and we stare at it and we go back to it and it becomes, creepy, all that kind of stuff. But what happens when we become fixated on that stuff, it dulls us. It dulls us to our sin. It dulls us to our godliness. And Satan fills us with forgetfulness of God. And you can almost tell when a guy is slipping into sexual sin because they stop reading their Bible, they stop serving and attending church, they become more distant from their family, they supposedly become more busy at work, they have all these excuses, and they isolate themselves. Well, that's they isolate themselves because they don't want anybody to see the indicators, but the indicators are already there, and so you have to you have to stick with that rigor. And the grip of lust leads to God fading in our hearts. The grip of lust leads to God fading. And so as the more the lust increases, the more that God fades in the background. So we have to really fight against fixating on those things, that lust, those impurities, those sins. And then the next thing is that we start to rationalize. So we go from relaxing in our rigors to fixating on the sin, and now we become rationalizers. We justify our actions. We justify our thoughts. We justify what our eyes are doing. And what we need to understand is that the mind has an infinite capacity to fixate on the mind has an infinite capacity for rationalization, which means is that we will never run out of excuses. Okay. And isn't that so true? I mean, it's like, you can catch somebody red-handed, all the evidence is right there, and they'll still have a bunch of excuses and they'll blame, and that's absolutely unreal. And so, today is January 10th. And so the debates between Harris and Trump are supposed to be tonight. But also what happened too was that I think either the New York State Senate or the U.S. Senate brought Andrew Cuomo in front of them for all of the nursing home deaths that happened in New York over COVID. And of course, he lost. Part of this is part of the reason he lost his job as governor and was removed. And as they bring him before the hearings and they start to say all these things, his first thing is he blames Trump. And it's just like, um, come on, come on. I mean, there's some excuses. I mean, you got caught red-handed. This has been, documented. You got removed as governor, and your first thing is I blame Trump. It's like, come on, And so we have an amazing capacity to rationalize. And then the final thing is that we turn into degeneration. We sink into degeneration, and degeneration is basically like we're in that lowest. We've hit bottom. And what's interesting about David is that he went from having multiple wives. Then he was tempted by Bathsheba. He could not restrain, could not exert self-control. He sleeps with her. She gets pregnant. He tries to get Uzziah to sleep with her. He refuses because he's at war. He's a man of integrity, and so he sends him back off to battle and tells his commander to pull back at the heat of the battle, and Uzziah is killed. And so not only has he had an adultery, he's got a woman pregnant. He's now murdered somebody, and it's just a downward spiral from there. Because as soon as Solomon was born, he just started having problems in his house, and his house was never in order. I mean, he had brothers killing one another, brothers sleeping with sisters. I mean, it was that's degeneration right there. In a nutshell, that's a definition of degeneration right there. And so he his reign went downhill from that point forward. But what was probably even worse is that he lost the smile of God. David is still known as a man after God's own heart, but what's sad is that God's favor got pulled from that point. And he's known as one of Israel's greatest kings, but there's turmoil. I mean, he had one son commit mutiny against him, and he had to flee. And that's the sad thing right there. And he lost the smile. And Dr. Hughes says, few would stray if we could see the future. And what's funny is that when we are relaxing, from our rigors and we're fixated on sin and we're making excuses, the last thing that we're focused on is the future. We're interested in filling the lust of the moment right then. But yet, if we would just even think, look up for a second, talk to somebody, we would, who's been through it, man, we would realize the devastation that comes. And so it's so important. If you have your Bibles, turn to 1 Thessalonians 4. 1 Thessalonians 4, and we're going to look at verses 3 through 8. Verse 3 says this: "At the same time, pray also for us that God may open up a door for the word to declare the mystery of Christ, on account of which I am in prison, that I may make it clear which is how I ought to speak. Walk in wisdom towards outsiders, making the best use of time. Let your speech always be gracious, seasoned with salt, so that you may know how you ought to answer each person." And I think that's a great illustration, because the fact is it simply goes like this: that we need to walk in wisdom towards outsiders. We need to make the best use of our time. Our speech needs to be seasoned with grace, not crude joking. And we need to be focused on what God has for us, And I just want to encourage you guys, as you go into your small groups tonight, that purity is the thing that has tripped many of us up, and in many different ways. But I just want to encourage you guys to just continue to pursue that godliness, to pursue that holiness, to put up boundaries, so that you won't trip into licentiousness and impurity. Okay, and that you'll get guys in your group to hold you accountable. And I know a lot of you guys, you're carrying around a heavy burden of this secret sin, and it's time to let it go. God is going to forgive you. I know Satan's going to throw a bunch of guilt on you and say that's not the case, but he's going to forgive you. And so I want to encourage you, let go of that sin, come pure, and let God do a work in your heart. And so, and then to finish up with this, 3 steps that Dr. Hughes gives. 1, set up accountability. Get somebody who will keep you accountable. All right? If you need somebody, come and talk to me. I may not necessarily be able to keep you accountable, but I can find somebody in church who can. 2, commit to prayer. I'm talking about prayer every day. And if it's a major problem, man, hit that prayer hit God with that prayer, and hit him like the persistent widow, like the sinful tax collector, with that heart that's broken and remorseful for your sin. And then finally put up mind hedges. Okay, that's the boundaries that I was talking about just a little bit ago. You have to set up boundaries. Okay, because if there's no boundaries, then you're gonna end up in a ditch all the time. So I want to encourage you guys, develop that discipline of purity and take the steps necessary. All right, God bless you guys.